Hey everybody, today we're diving into something that confuses a lot of women, Kegels. Maybe you've been doing them for years, hoping to stop leakage, prolapse, pelvic pain, but you're still struggling. If you've been told before that Kegels are the solution for those issues, here's why they're not. Because here's the truth. Kegels alone aren't enough to fix your pelvic floor. And in some cases, they might make things worse. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand why, and I'll give you practical ways to obviously actually rebuild a strong foundational functional pelvic floor that works with your body and not against it. Of course, I'm not just going to say don't do something and then not give you the solution. I got you. So first, let's get into the point of a Kegel so you can correctly understand when to use it. So a Kegel targets the levator ani muscle group, which are a part of the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is more than just the levator ani too, as well. It includes the coccygeus, fascia, ligaments, connective tissue, your organs, things that all support the bladder, your uterus, your bowels, okay? So the pelvic floor also works with coordination of all of those other things and with your deep core, your transverse abdominis, your diaphragm, your multifidi, and believe it or not, your hip muscles as well. So a Kegel is a voluntary contraction of the pelvic floor muscles. Think of it like you're squeezing and lifting those muscles. It's almost like I tell people that like you're stopping the flow of urine. Some people use the analogy like picking up a blueberry. I think that's silly. But done correctly, it can strengthen those weakened pelvic floor muscles and actually support your bladder, your uterus, okay? But I really want to get into why you don't always want to use them. Because when you think about it, a pelvic floor muscle contraction is only going to be targeted to those pelvic floor muscles, right? And if your pelvic floor is a part of a much bigger system, like your deep core, which is comprised of your transverse abdominis, your multifidi, your diaphragm, and the pelvic floor, if it's a part of a bigger system, why would you only focus on one part of that system? So at times, Kegels can be very helpful because you want to target that specific single muscle group, right? Like you want to make sure that that muscle group is working correctly. Then you want to make sure your diaphragm is working correctly. Then you want to make sure that your deep core muscles are working correctly, as well as your low back strength as well, right? So individually, you want to make sure that those groups are working together. You want to make sure that those groups are working independently of one another. Then you need to move on to making sure that the entire group of muscles work together as a team. Okay. So when I say a pelvic floor solo muscle contraction has a time and place, the rest of this podcast, it has a time and place, but you have to move on from it. So if you were given Kegels as an initial line of treatment, good, great. You want to make sure you can contract that muscle group, and you want to make sure that you have the mind to motor coordination. So that way that muscle group is firing as it should. But over time, you need to ditch that isolated contraction and bring it all together with the team. Are we in agreement with that? Cool. Now let's get into why Kegels often don't work long-term the way people think that they do, or even doctors or PTs think that they do. Your pelvic floor, like I mentioned, works with everything together. And pelvic floor dysfunction is often really, really complex. Sometimes it's caused by weakness, but it can also be caused by like tension and poor coordination or malalignment with the rest of the system. So doing Kegels on their own without even addressing those other issues can also just increase pressure, tension, dysfunction, and even pain. Think of it like lifting a heavy weight without stabilizing your core first, right? Like think about going and deadlifting 300 pounds, and not doing that before. Like you might hurt yourself, right? So if you are somebody who has a lot of symptoms, and I'm going to get into this, if you're somebody who's experiencing certain symptoms, Kegels are not the first line of treatment for you. And if no physician or pelvic floor therapist has actually like evaluated you and told you that Kegels are like the first line of treatment for you, I wouldn't just start doing them because you might be layering dysfunction on tension. And then you have yourself a double problem. So don't do that. There are also other factors that impact your pelvic floor, and that includes posture, core strength, your hip mobility, your daily habits, like sitting for hours at a desk all day long, straining on the toilet, repetitive heavy lifting, like a very laborious job, and coordinated breathing, breath holding. So yes, Kegels can be helpful in the right context, but they're rarely the whole solution. So now let's get into how do I know if Kegels are actually helping, or are they actually making things worse? So these are the signs that you're going to want to watch for. pain or pressure after doing Kegels, constipation, straining, or incomplete bowel movements and urination, urinary urgency, worsening leakage, chronic clenching, tension, pain during intimacy, inability to have an orgasm, heaviness at the end of the day, heaviness with prolapse, heaviness after exercise, things like that that continue to worsen. Maybe you've already have those symptoms, but then they get worse and worse and worse. These are all signs that your body is telling you that it's not the solution for you and it's time for a different approach. More or less, Kegels are not the answer for you. So now let's get into what actually does work. A functional whole body approach. You need to start with an assessment first. Everybody is different. Every pelvic floor is different. Some pelvic floors need strengthening, some need relaxation, some need coordination. You have to know where you're starting. Don't just start by listening to a YouTube or somebody on Instagram telling you what to do. You really need to understand where your body's starting point is at, so that way you know where to go. The next is breathing and core integration. As I mentioned, you need to make sure that individually muscle groups work on their own. So your diaphragm, your deep core, your pelvic floor, as I mentioned, they all work together. So you need to start by learning to breathe correctly while engaging your core and your pelvic floor, right? Because if they work together and you want to focus on maybe strengthening your core first, right? Your core moves with your breath. So making sure your inhales and exhales are coordinated can help you get a better core contraction. Same thing with the pelvic floor. Your diaphragm and your pelvic floor mirror each other up and down. They have to move synchronously, not asynchronously. So if your breath is out of whack and your pelvic floor is also out of whack, it's going to be really hard to get those things back doing the same thing that you want them to do together, right? So let's say you're breath holding all the time. Like you are chronically stuck in like holding your breath, and then you're sitting there doing Kegels at the same time. But really what happens when you hold your breath, where is your pelvic floor in space? Where is your diaphragm in space? If you're breathing or you're holding your breath, your diaphragm is in a contracted state down closer to the pelvic floor, which creates a negative intra-abdominal pressure into the abdomen. Where does that pressure go? Well, it goes down into the pelvic floor. So now your pelvic floor is at a lengthened state, or it should be. It should be at a lengthened state, but you are holding your breath and now you're Kegeling, and now you're bringing your pelvic floor up towards your head, which is opposite of where it should go when your pelvic floor needs to lengthen as your diaphragm is contracting. So realistically right here, that is a perfect example of incoordination and creating dysfunction on tension, or creating dysfunction on top of dysfunction. Your pelvic floor and your core and your breath all need to work together naturally and in coordination and synchronously. So that way, if you want to do Kegels as a first line of treatment, you are doing it correctly. You're not layering dysfunction on top of already established dysfunction. The next thing would be functional movement. So movements like squats and hip hinges and like lifting your baby, for example, or lifting weights. These are all perfect opportunities to train your pelvic floor in context in real life. These movements are much safer and much more effective than isolated Kegels on their own. Because listen, you probably don't have pelvic floor issues at rest. And typically women are doing Kegels at rest. Maybe they're in their car driving, right? But typically most of the time women are doing Kegels when they're sitting, when they're standing, and when they're lying down. So you're training your pelvic floor to work at rest. And if were to guess, you're probably experiencing leakage when you cough, sneeze, laugh, run, jump. Maybe you're having pressure at the end of the day because you baby wore all day. Maybe you're having pressure when you're baby wearing. Maybe you're having bowel issues. Maybe you're having muscle spasms when you're trying to have a urination, or you're trying to urinate, or you're trying to have a bowel movement. Maybe you're having muscle spasms during intimacy. Your pelvic floor is doing things it shouldn't do in those moments of basically movement in real life, right? So why train your pelvic floor to do things at rest and instead train your pelvic floor to adapt with real life movement patterns? Because that's what it's all about. Your pelvic floor needs to adapt to changes in pressure in the system. It needs to contract when it needs to contract, and it needs to relax when it needs to relax. If you're training it to constantly just clench and be engaged because that's what everyone has told you that it does, you're training your pelvic floor to be unrealistic, because the pelvic floor needs to move up and down when it should move. So again, movements like squatting and hip hinging, those are real life patterns. Lifting your baby up from the ground, getting off the ground and into a standing position. Those are complex functional movement patterns. And your pelvic floor needs to be trained in those patterns. So that way you can squat and you can deadlift and you can lift your baby up off the floor without peeing your pants. The next thing is obviously a personalized plan. The right plan for you is going to combine strength training, releasing, relaxation, nervous system relaxation, coordination, and functional movement patterns. Probably some healthy lifestyle habits in there, or healthy lifestyle changes and healthy habits, because a right plan that includes all of those things is what makes you a human being. Like, you are a dynamic human being that needs to be able to strength train, that needs to be strong, that needs to have coordination, that needs to have right to left balance, that needs to understand functional movement patterns, that needs to have nervous system regulation, that needs to have stress relief, that needs to make sure their posture is good throughout the day, especially if you are a newborn mom and you're chronically hunched over breastfeeding and you're chronically in a position where you're baby wearing and maybe you have a toddler on the other hip. The right plan is going to combine all of those things, because that's what makes a good plan for your body. That's how you get better. If your plan only includes Kegels, again, maybe stop and re-listen to this whole episode. Like, it's not it. It's not the plan for anybody. So if you're unsure where to start, working with a pelvic floor PT can make huge difference when someone actually assesses you, finds your baseline, finds where you're at, your starting point is at, and then can make those adjustments and give you that plan that includes everything that it needs to include to actually see symptom relief and get long-term change. So the first thing is obvious. So the first thing is, to answer your question today, what can you start doing? Stop doing Kegels mindlessly. Stop doing them at the stoplights. Stop doing them whenever you remember to do them. Check in with your body. Add breath work. Make sure you're breathing correctly. Stop holding your breath. Add functional movement into your daily routine. Focus on quality repetitions over quantity as well, right? Like, don't just balls to the wall things. Make sure you're getting real good repetitions, full range of motion, good inhales, good exhales, and things are kind of firing all together. Don't just brush through it. Make sure you're strengthening your deep core. Make sure you're strengthening single leg unilateral movement patterns. Those are the things that are actually going to see long-term change in your pelvic floor strength, your pelvic strength, meaning your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, your hip flexors, your core, everything that attaches to the pelvis, because all of these things make up a true plan. The other thing that you need to focus on as well is making sure you're getting good workouts in, not just these intense, crazy workouts, because recovery needs time as well. Recovery is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And if you're not focusing on recovery as well as your rehab phase or your strength conditioning phase that you show up in the gym and do every single day, you're going to be missing so many pieces of your recovery journey, because your pelvic floor has a certain threshold, and that threshold needs to be met or exceeded very little, so that way your symptoms can be managed throughout. And that, again, takes working with a professional who can read your body, read where you're at right now, and then get you a solid game plan to move forward on. And if you're not sure where to start, you can always join my free school group. It's called the Pelvic Wellness Academy, where you can learn everything about what you should be doing versus what you shouldn't be doing, so you can actually start to see results. Remember, your pelvic floor can improve. It just takes smart, holistic approach, not just more Kegels. So here's the big takeaway from this whole entire podcast that I really want you to understand. Your pelvic floor is strong and resilient, and it needs more than Kegels. By combining a solid assessment, by combining breathing and core engagement and functional movement patterns and progressive strengthening over time, you can actually start seeing progress in your symptoms, less leakage, less pressure, less pain, and you can start to move confidently again. If you want more guidance, check out my Instagram, check out my other YouTube videos where I walk you through step-by-step exercises and a plan that actually builds your pelvic floor safely and effectively. We work with women all over the world as well through one-on-one coaching programs. So if you ever do need some help for something, book a free call with me or my team, and we'll be able to highlight where you should be focusing a lot of your time and attention. Remember, strong functional movement is possible at any stage of your life. You just have to start by understanding what's going to work for your body. You just need to understand that taking care of yourself and saying yes to that investment is what you're going to need to actually move the needle forward. Again, you can't DIY yourself through this. You've probably done that before. That's probably why you're still listening to this episode. So take care of yourself, because you deserve it. And if you need anything, you know where to find me.